The title of this session is organizing the Ethics Bowl. In this case, would be the regionals for IEB. I've been involved with the API IEB since 2000. I've been in every role you can imagine. Most of my time, though, has been spent. I've organized 2 regional college ethics bowl events at Villanova, my institution, and for the last 9 years have been hosting a high school ethics bowl. So I have a lot of experience with the organizational part of it, and I'm also on the API IEB national competition kind of operations committee. So that's where I'm coming from. I guess I'd be interested to know, is anybody here thinking about starting a regional or hosting one, just so I know who my audience is? And if your camera's not on, could you do a thumbs up so I know who's talking? Okay, who here has organized a regional competition? Okay, all right, well, so okay.
Well, let me just say I haven't done it, but my university has done it the last 5 years or so. So I'm not a source of info, but
Okay, well, but my impression is that most of us are interested in learning more about this. So what I thought would be helpful is I'm just going to go through 5 key ingredients. Now that doesn't mean, and this is not an exhaustive list, and so please chime in. And then I thought we'd just open it up if people have questions and concerns or ideas about how to make things improve the experience for everybody involved. That's an organizer like me would love to hear. All right, so the first thing that I need to pay attention to is communication. So it's multiple emails, huge distribution lists, and then individual emails, keeping all those emails in the same place so that the thing that I'm learning is that I need to, and I've been doing this more recently, and this might sound like, why wouldn't I do that from the beginning? But that's just the way I work. Instead of searching through my 4,000 emails in my inbox trying to find the one I need, they go into a file. So all of those things, and if I'm saying things that are obvious, it's for the value of repetition, right? Or if you're like me, you never thought of that because that's not how that's not the way my brain works. So communication, and so it's really important as soon as possible as soon as I know a date, to get that date out to the teams in my region, the teams that have participated in the past, to get that information on the high school level to the high school ethics bowl and people, and get it to Alex. As soon as I know the IEB one, I get it to John and to Kristen so that it can be up on the website. But I can't emphasize enough the constant communication. You can't write an email in September for a November competition and expect people to pay attention to it. So now you should send that email in September, then send another one in October, and then send another one at the beginning of November. So communication is key, and to have all the information in every single email. And now you could create a Google Doc that you can then share the link with that has all that information so that the email is not huge, but you can't say, well, I sent you an email back in September, the information is there. That's not really helpful. All right, so anyway, I'm getting too into the weeds. So communication. Secondly, you need to figure out your venues. You need to figure out how many teams can compete in your regional based on your capacity. Now that capacity is in two ways. One is physical capacity. How many available rooms are you going to have at your institution to host this? When it's in person, you need to have a plenary room, which tends to be the room where, at least for my case, that's where the final round is. So because it holds the most people. And so you need to figure out, can I get that space? How many simultaneous rounds can I host? Because that's going to determine how many teams you can accept. And that's a really important piece of information. So you need to figure that out. It also, the other limiting factor is judges. So remember, if you have 10 teams coming, that's 5 rooms. So you need 15 judges and 5 moderators. Sometimes sometimes a judge will also be a moderator, but that's only, to me, that's an exception to the rule, and only if you have a very experienced judge to serve in both. It's too much to ask a relatively new judge to do both of those things. So what's your reasonable expectation of the number of judges and moderators you can recruit? What's the physical limitation of your campus? You figure out how many teams can come. You have to have food. So this is where a budget comes in. You need to be able to feed people. So when I host the high school ethics bowl, it starts at 7 a.m. Like registration opens at 7 a.m. and they're on my campus. If they're welcome to stay the entire event. It's usually just the last 2 teams for the final round. They're there till 6:15. So it's a long day. So I provide breakfast, I provide lunch, for all the judges. There's snacks that are available. That's a not crazy significant number, but it's a fairly significant number. So that the way one could cover that is through fees that we would charge for each school. I charge a fee per school. I also have some funding to support that. So I don't have to charge a lot. It's $35 per team, per school to come to our high school ethics bowl. The last time I hosted a IEB regional was in 2007, and I think we charged $50 per school. We also had funding to support that, though, so it depends on your funding situation. The other thing I need to throw in, it just occurred to me, is that you need to also find hotels for, if you're hosting a college bowl, you're going to have lodging opportunities for those schools, and have that available for the coaches as soon as you possibly can. So that's 3 things I've talked about. 4th thing is recruiting, the recruiting of judges. When I first started, I sent an email to, I happen to work at a campus that has a rich resource of ethicists. There are 15 of us on our campus, which is an extraordinary number. So, and I got about 90% of them to judge. So I was already in good shape. And then I reached out to the humanities faculty. I reached out to the science, biology, and chemistry faculty, some of our engineers, the business faculty who were interested in ethics, and I knew them through my contacts over time at my institution, and I was able to. The first year I did it, it was almost exclusively faculty, whether faculty from Villanova or from other schools.
Oh,
Westchester University was a great, where Larry is. There are three people from his institution judged for me that very first year. But you need to, and then you keep that list, and then I'm constantly putting people, as I meet people, as people get referred to me. Once people judge, they enjoy the experience, then they tell their friends about it, they send them to me. So I have a really big list. So it's just a matter of reaching out to your friends and your network, and putting an announcement in whatever communication device is used at your university to communicate with faculty, to just let them know what's going on. I've also approached librarians. Many librarians enjoy this, especially the library. At our library, the staff is divided. They're responsible for various disciplines. So I reached out to those responsible for religion and philosophy, English, communication, and they've been very receptive to judging. So that's what I do with the judges. And then the moderators, If it's a high school ethics bowl, I recruit from my undergraduate classes, give them, Richard and I were talking, it's kind of an extra credit opportunity for those who need it, and do training with them, and they moderate. If it's a college bowl, so far I tried to use graduate students from our philosophy department, typically are the moderators. And then the last thing, and this is really getting into the weeds, the very day of the competition, there are things that it's extraordinary that I needed to pay attention to. The very first time I did it, actually the first several times I did it, I kept running into these obstacles that would never have occurred to me. Like one of the most obvious ones is to make sure the rooms are open. It never occurred to me that a classroom could be locked. I don't know, just why would you lock them? I don't understand that. But anyway, they're locked. So I had to, the very first year, we got delayed by 45 minutes because I had to wait for public safety to show up and open up the classrooms. So just very space and scrap paper. I make scrap paper available to every team. Some of them go through hundreds of pages of scrap paper in 2 rounds. I don't know how that's possible, but that's what happens. So I had to have reams and reams of paper available, and score sheets. You know, I think we're moving towards a point where everybody will have electronic capacity for that. But right now, at least for me, it's all paper. And so I need to make sure there's all the paper that's involved, the criteria, the cases, having all that stuff available, having the case. One of the other nightmares, I'm surprised I didn't write this down on my notes, just occurred to me, is you have to create the folders or the envelopes of each round and the cases for each round, so that the same case is being discussed across those preliminary rounds, and have them in the right order with the question. And I do that myself. I don't trust anybody else at my institution to do that. I do that myself because I've learned that I can't trust anybody because they've made mistakes. So I do, but I can't emphasize enough what a nightmare it is when something gets screwed up on that level. So there's a lot of intensive logistic stuff that happens on the day of the competition that doesn't really, you don't really relax. I don't relax until the preliminary rounds are done. Once those are done, I'm only dealing with 16 judges. Those tend to be my best judges. They tend to be doing it for the longest time. The moderators, I only need 4 moderators. Those tend to be part of my organizing committee. So I don't have to worry about it after that. But that very early morning, getting things going is a nightmare. Anyway, so those are my thoughts. I thought I would just throw out my experience first. And I do want to put in a public service announcement about the API IEB. You might have gotten an email or got an inkling of this. There have been some changes for this coming year. API is going to set up a one-stop shopping experience for registering for your regional. Remember in the past, you would pay the regional their fee, and then you would pay API. Well, now everything's going to be in the same place, and API will make sure the regions get their money. And the great thing about one of the other changes is that when you and you have to communicate to your coaches, obviously in your region, is that they register for the regional with API, they pay the regional fee and the API fee, but there's no longer a requirement for API membership. When you apply, if you get invited to the nationals and you go online and you register, you have to pay the fee for that national competition, and included in that fee is an API membership. So those are some changes that are coming out for this year. Anyway, so I'll stop talking, and I'd love to hear echoing of my experience, or fill in what, ask questions that maybe I didn't touch on things, or want me to clarify anything, or whatever. Floor is open.
Hi, John. Or hi, Mark, sorry. I'm wondering if you could say something about how you secure, oh, wait.
I hear you.
Okay, we're toggling volume in this room. I'm trying to wonder if you could say something about how you secured funding for the regionals, who you approached on your campus first, Second, how you made a case to them for why this was a good thing to fund. And 3, any particular things you offered to them in exchange for advertising or involvement or etc. And then 4, if you tied it to particular faculty involvement.
Okay, well, good. I might not remember all of those 4, so if I don't answer one of them, please remind me. So for the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl, when we hosted, Villanova hosted the regionals, I went to the dean. Well, I figured out how much I needed, first of all, and I looked at my own budget. I'm the administrator of my program, and so I kind of have freedom to use it however I see fit. And but I didn't have enough at that time to cover all the costs. So I went to the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, my boss, and I made the case. She was already enamored with the Ethics Bowl from what she had heard about it from the students who had participated in since 2000. So this is 2007 or 6. So when I went, it was an older dean. So it was a man. When I went to him and I said, look, I need this much money. I think it really wasn't that much money. It was about $1,000, relatively speaking to the dean's budget. $1,000 is a drop in the bucket. So I knew it wasn't that much in relative terms. He just gave it to me. Now, partly, I think what helped me get that money was that he trusted my judgment. Secondly, he knew that students enjoyed this a lot. I think what he also was intrigued by was all these other schools coming to Villanova. So Villanova could kind of show off a little bit. So, I mean, and you know, I'm sorry to say it was that easy, because I know that that's not going to be the case across the board. Now, I will say about the High School Ethics Bowl, it was a member of the Philadelphia Philosophy Consortium, which is obviously made up of philosophers around the area. There was a layperson, non-academic, who was really interested in philosophy, who was a fund manager coming to the end of his career. And he had heard about the High School Ethics Bowl through the Squire Foundation, Alex, and he wanted to get something going in Philadelphia. So he approached me because I can't remember how it came. I don't know how he got my name. I don't remember. It's been so long. And he made a contribution that covered all the food for the high school, which high school students eat a lot of food. So that was extremely helpful. And he's made a contribution ever since. Every year he gives me the money to cover the cost of that. So again, I didn't do any work for that. Now I will say recently, I think, you know, there's a lot of things other than the Ethics Bowl going on in my unit, but we just recently we've been on Development's map for the last 15 years as they've been doing their work, and we struck gold with a very significant family gift that is going to be, it's endowing us and returning quite a bit of money every year. So I'm in a position where I don't really need support. But that was because we did the footwork. I will say, when we started the Ethics Bowl team, we had to beg for money every year from the deans. I went to every dean at our university. There's 4 undergraduate colleges. I went to every dean. And in particular, if they had a kid, one of their students was on our team, I made it clear that arts and sciences shouldn't be covering your kid's participation. So I used some shame, and you can't really claim this if you're not going to put your money where your mouth is, blah, 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 blah. And I got that money. And then my dean, the same fellow that gave me the $1,000 for the regionals, that same dean was embarrassed. So he then gave me a line item for the IUB Ethics Bowl team. So, which is cool. So anyway, so I'm thinking I missed one of your questions.
One of them, the only one you haven't answered, is did you have to promise anything to folks for the money in terms of faculty involvement or advertising or marketing back for a particular organization?
Oh, thank you for repeating that. To the deans no promise of anything. We do have, every faculty member has a service obligation. And so when I recruit faculty members, I make sure they put it in their CV, or not their CV, but we have this thing called Activity Insight. I don't know if anybody else has that. It's annoying as hell. But anyway, it's the way that university contracts faculty publication and service. So it's just another item that they can fill in, especially junior faculty. And then I did, for the high school ethics bowl, I did approach the admissions office because I thought, here are these amazing high schoolers. It's a no-brainer. You're not paying a dime, and it's free. It's, so I got them to pay. So I got them to pay for the breakfast. So the guy that gave me the money, I used his money to buy the lunch, and we had a fairly significant lunch, but I wanted to feed them for breakfast. So I got the admissions people to pay for the breakfast. And then they flooded me with all kinds of junk to give to them, but then they stopped doing it. After a couple of years, they wrote me and they said, yeah, it's not really interested anymore. So I thought that was weird, but, and I'm friends with the director of admissions. So it was just very weird. I don't know what the thinking was, because why would you not market yourself to these high school students? Now they were area students, so Villanova has we are a national university, so I guess they didn't want more Pennsylvania and New Jersey kids coming. So they didn't want to spend time with them. Anyway. What's in the chat here?
So I'm just going to jump back in again, Mark, because
Sure.
I'm thinking about trying to create a regional bowl at some point, because the nearest regional to us is over 8 hours away. And that's really expensive and incredibly time consuming to travel to. And flight is, we've actually flown to other regionals in the past, and that's completely cost prohibitive, especially now with airline tickets though as high as they are. So living where we do, it might just be better to try to do a regional myself. So sorry for all the questions, everybody. Jump in, push my questions aside. But one of the issues that I'm wondering about is related to a point John just put in the chat, which is it's helpful for organizers to know that you can set regional fees to cover your costs if you have funding issues at your host campus. So while that's true to some extent, right? Having been someone who tries to organize conferences and do other sorts of workshops and public facing events, as you all know, catering costs and venue costs on universities are often astronomical. And so at least I found at my institution that if I were to actually charge what the real costs are, I still wouldn't have enough. I mean, I'd have to have registration fees that are incredibly high. So that's why I was asking a lot of these questions about other sources of funding, because you can offset some of the costs with the registration fees, but you can't always do that. So seeking additional funding is really valuable. So my next question, Mark, is could you maybe explain a little bit more about how you set your budget for the costs?
Well,
and specifically, did you have any cost saving measures that you could suggest?
No significant cost saving measures, more environmentally friendly measures, right? So for example, the envelopes that we put the cases in for each moderator, we save them year to year to year, right? But it's not a significant cost saving. I mean, it's an environmental cost saving, not a financial cost saving. So we've done it so long. So my first time doing it, I just ballparked it, and we were we under budgeted because we didn't realize how much the food was going to cost. So we didn't have a clear idea of how many people were going to be there and who was going to eat. Like not everybody, some people would take off right away and they wouldn't eat. And we get charged based on how many people we expected coming. We changed that, by the way. Our dining services so what we would do for the high school and for the College Bowl for lunch is we send them to our cafeteria, and the cafeteria will only charge us the number of people that they have to swipe through. So we were able to know exactly how much we had to pay at the end. And so we could, the number of guests you have, they're probably going to go eat. So I would just figure out what the cost of those guests would be. If I could get, if I could subsidize that. So if I have my own money and from another account within my program that I could contribute, I could bring the cost of the food down by $2 a kid, right? It would bring it down to $6. I think it was at $8 for lunch, whatever. So I just would figure out the food. I'd figure out the paper costs, right? We had no other costs. We didn't have to pay the university to use the rooms. That's all. Villanova doesn't have that policy. It's just they're available for anybody's use. So, I mean, anybody in the university's use. So, I mean, I just figure out paper costs, and you guesstimate that. And once you do it once, the numbers are pretty much going to stay the same unless you have this massive increase of teams that want to participate.
Mark, do you mind if I just jump in about the cost issue? I think it is helpful for organizers to know too that the sort of, how done up they are varies pretty widely. We have hosted 2-year bowls and upper Midwest bowls, and you compare what we do to the Central States and it's night and day. The Central States has a very nice luncheon and you're getting swag, and we are doing it on a shoestring budget. We are getting box lunches from the Subway on campus, and that's pretty much it. And with some of these virtual components, you can reduce a lot of the paper costs if you start to integrate some of these other things virtually. So you'd be surprised that you might be able to get costs down to the sort of $12 to $15 a student level. And then it becomes, it's $150 regional fee and we're okay. Or, maybe it's $150 fee and that leaves me $500 in the hole, but now I'm only asking for $500 instead of for, a couple of $1,000 from somebody. And I'll just echo what Mark said at the beginning, that I think the profile raising is usually a pretty good incentive for deans or whoever. And sorry, one final thought. A lot of ethics bowl teams, right? They get founded in student involvement. And one of the things that we've learned is that you can sort of play academic affairs and student involvement off of each other. So, you could go to student involvement, you get a little money, and they have different grants that they offer, but then you can go to your dean and say, hey, we need a little bit more money. And you can sort of cobble it together by going to both sides of the house, so to speak.
Right. Richard, you wanted to talk about cost saving as well?
Yeah, so I had a handful of points to make, but John made a couple of them. So I was going to mention, that different regions do things in different ways, and it doesn't have to be a banquet. But I'll add to that, to Deborah's point. At our university, to use the food services is just outrageous as well. It's $25 a person, but they have a policy by which we can petition to not use them. And if the event's small enough, and our regional is usually about 15 teams, and that counts as small enough, that I can just order pizzas and stop at the grocery store and buy soda pops and do that on my university card. And so, I can come in under $250 for, 7 schools, 15 teams or so. So the extra cost is just 10 or 20 bucks per school. So that might be an option for some folks. The other part of it is some of the schools participating in the regions, the teams might have budgets that can contribute towards that without it, being a team by team thing. So for example, I have a fairly large budget every year and there's lots of carry forward. So I always just put my name down as a co-host, and I will sponsor, if it's not at our school, maybe the bagels and coffee in the morning, right? So talk to the organizers or the teams that might participate in your region and say, hey, does anybody have anything to contribute here before you go to the schools? I like to have the burden be, just as minimal as possible on the schools. Some of them literally have no budget. And if they have to travel and stay in a hotel room, that's enough. So we've never actually had to charge anyone because we can do it with pizzas and Cokes and, and other schools can contribute a little bit.
Right. Great idea, Richard. Robert?
Actually, my question just showed up in the chat. I'm not sure what it's a response to, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Are people, organizers opening to co-hosting? Especially somebody who's not familiar with the regionals or even with the college bowl. It might be a way of sharing labor, sharing cost, and letting people slowly figure out what's this all about and how do I help, and if am I ready to take it on, a sole effort.
Do you mean co-hosting between universities or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I could, well, just this past year, Villanova co-hosted with, was it UMBC? I can't remember where the Northeast Regional was, but wherever it was, they didn't have the Zoom capacity to do the Ethics Bowl. So Villanova brought its Zoom capacity. So we co-hosted in that way. That was, but I can imagine, I mean, I can imagine, similar to what Richard's saying, is that if some institutions that are participating in the regional have funds that they can contribute, I don't see a reason why that can't happen. Or even the organizational talent, the organizational talent to advise the local organizer who might be new to it. I would think it's, and then as Matt says, the Texas Regional is a co-hosted thing. So yeah, I think those things are all possible.
Yeah, we've co-hosted the Upper Midwest with a school that's about 40 minutes away from Harper. They brought some students to Harper once to help with some of the, running around type stuff. And then we went out there because they had the facilities, but no expertise. So we did all of the, the actual running of the event, but they provided the facility. So it's kind of a nice way to sort of trade cost for expertise a little bit.
Thanks, John. Well, yeah, I just saw Richard's point about vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free. All that stuff is important. So one of the things, it's in my email to the coaches, particularly on the high school level, is dietary restrictions. That's very important. And also, again, this doesn't pertain to the IEB, but if you're thinking about starting a high school regional, there's waivers involved. There's a whole bunch of legal issues involved with hosting an on-campus minor program or a program involving minors. The state of Pennsylvania, as you might remember, the Penn State issue came down hard on all schools in Pennsylvania. So I've gotten used to it. It was a nightmare when it first started, but what happens in that waiver process is that students have to identify any allergies, which then goes into our dietary decisions. That's why I'm glad that I'm financially able to work through dining services, because they deal with that all the time and I don't have to worry about it. I just need to let them know what we need and they make all that stuff available. Alex?
Yeah, I was just, oh, sorry, wait. Deborah, were you? Sorry, we're in the same room and compensating for volume. Everybody hear me okay? Great, okay. I was just gonna offer on the point about programs for minors, particularly on the high school side. This is something that we're seeing kind of nationally and increased attention to. Some of which is, important and justified attention, others of which is university cover your energy. But that's all to say, we're compiling a set of resources to help out with that. In fact, like a set of sample boilerplate forms for things like photo consent, allergies, like protection of minors on campus, travel forms, those types of things. So that's something that HQ on the high school ethics bowl side is trying to pay some more attention to. Something that has been possible too, I'll just return to the funding point, because that's often, that's, for those of you who have organized these before, you'll know that at both the high school and college level, that's the sort of perennial concern, right? Like it comes back again and again and again, but that's one of the foremost obstacles to people getting these started for the first time ever, right? And the most common case I hear of someone who wants to get involved in this and doesn't, this is the reason why. So this is not always possible, but for the last several years, at least on the high school side, NHSUB has been pretty good about having some extra funds to throw toward new regionals. Typically that's not tons. It usually ranges between $1,000 and $3,000. And it depends on how many new requests for regionals we get each year, but that is sometimes possible. So that's all to say that we hope there's a continued set of resources to support on that side.
Thanks, Al. Thanks. Deborah?
Can you all hear me now? Okay, so I know we've spent a lot of time talking about how you get one up and running and how you do it on your campus. What if you could say a little bit more about the process of proposing a regional, and if there are restrictions on how many regionals there could be? Because, so again, just to use my university as an example, if I wanted to propose a regional competition, it might be that you know, there's already too many regionals, or that we need a certain number of odd versus even regionals for it to matter for, you know, as organizations move forward with bids. So if you could maybe say a little bit more about that process, because I know I have those questions and I bet other folks here do too.
Thanks, Deborah. I'm throwing that to John.
Yeah, and I'm going to lean on Richard a little bit here because his history with this goes back further than mine. But there's really, I think, two considerations with introducing new regions. One is if the region itself is viable. So in other words, can you reliably field a solid, 8 or more teams essentially? And then the other consideration is whether the creation of a region could harm existing regions. And I mean harm not competitively, right? So I think some coaches worry, oh, new regions means less bids per region, and we don't like that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that you don't want to create a region and then cause another region to not be able to be a viable region by doing that. So a few years ago, we split the Upper Midwest into 2 regions, the Upper Midwest and the Central States. But we did that right before COVID, and then the Central States was not viable during COVID. And so that has not been an active region for the last 2 years. And the Upper Midwest is likely to reconsolidate as part of creating the virtual region. But there's nothing that prohibits the creation of a new region. And this is where I'm going to need Richard's help. I think that it is a thing that gets voted on by the IAB Council. But there's not no, we need an even number of regions or any other things like that. It's about some of the considerations that I was just speaking to.
Yeah, John, thanks. That's 95% of the story. So it's right. And it does get voted on. So years ago, we put together an ad hoc committee to come up with a set of criteria. And we just decided that there's no good criteria. It needs to occur on a case-by-case basis. The one piece of the puzzle that John sort of alluded to but didn't make explicit is there should be some need for it. So Deborah, you mentioned, I forgot what you said, you're 800 miles away or 8 hours drive or some such. Geography is the big one. The teams from Colorado used to come to the Wasatch Regional, and they're not that far away. It's it's a 8-hour drive or so at the very most. But in the fall and the wintertime, in some parts of the country, it's raining, in other parts it's snowing, there are mountain passes to go over. So the board's always thought that's a great reason for there to be a new regional, right? That sort of distance. So the process is you just say, hey, I would like to start a region, put it in writing. Here's why we think we need one. Most of the schools here are so far away. Here are the schools that, we think would come aboard, right? And it can't just be, we're going to talk to all these schools and get them on board, but something that's not necessarily a firm commitment to participate, but enough interest that makes it seem likely that you've got 8 schools or so participating. And the board will take it under consideration and vote. And we've never said no, right? We haven't had anybody wanting to start a region in someone else's backyard. So there are circumstances under which we'd say no, but if there are teams wanting to do it, that's going to, do the work that we want done, which is getting more schools, more students involved. So it's a fairly simple process.
Thanks, Richard and John. John private chatted me a question, then I tried to answer him, and it says John Garcia is not in the meeting, which is bizarre because he's right there. But anyway, the question was, did I talk about recruiting volunteers? And I did briefly, but we have about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to make sure to raise that up if there were any questions or suggestions that I haven't mentioned earlier that people have had experience with.
I'll just say quickly that, there were some things that have come up in the discussions of diversity and outreach, et cetera, throughout the weekend that I think were beneficial. That it is tempting to feel driven almost entirely by the need to just get enough people. But I think it's important that people be considering issues of getting good representation from different fields. It's often very tempting for host schools to draw primarily from their own institution, and that's actually not ideal, right? Like, I think when Bob really was thinking about this, he was trying to, okay, we've got a faculty member, but we've got a professional from the community, and we have, an alumni, and trying to really diversify, not just in terms of gender and sexual orientation or anything like that, but in terms of just the backgrounds of the various judges. And it's something, I think it is the hardest thing about hosting, and it's an argument for, I think there's an argument for rotating hosts within a region, but there's a strong argument against it. And the argument against it is that you get a more stable judge pool, you can continue to grow it, and you can train them better. But if you have a pretty geographically spread out region, some schools are going to say, well, we got to move it west this time because it was kind of on the east last time. And so it is a balancing act.
Well, if I could speak to that, and then I'll be very brief. It's such an opportunity for IEB regionals to tap into the local high school ethics bowl teams. The coaches of those teams would make ideal judges. Also, when it comes to this question of rotating, if the universities or colleges within a region, if individual ones are also in a place where there's a regional high school ethics bowl, there's overlap of judges. So that your point, John, about the consistency, there's consistency both in high school and college. And if we could kind of tap into that cross-sectionally, I think you could have a bigger pool that you could draw on for that point. Ron?
Yeah, the one thing that to chime in with what John just said is that sometimes there's a perception if the judging pool is too much from the institution that's hosting, that there's some favoritism going on. And sometimes that's just perceived. And at least one time I went, yeah, they do seem to be leaning in favor of their own students. So it definitely makes sense to draw from beyond the school itself.
Right. I also think that this is where you could, in terms of building up funding resources to talk to development about what the Ethics Bowl is, and pick their brain about people in their network who live in the area who might serve as judges. And then you invite them to judge, and then they're like, how much money do you need? and it's, it's not that, it's in the development world, what you need to run an ethics bowl is not that big a number. So somebody might just write you a check for the year if it's $5,000, they just write to, I mean, I can't tell you how many times that happens to my colleagues, that they'll have an event. Someone's like, wow, that's really cool. And next thing you know, they've got a check for now maybe, that's, again, my institution might, whatever. But the point is, to keep talking and inviting people, there's no harm in doing that. And also, when I go to events, like when a department has an event where they're honoring someone in the community, or they have these speakers come in and the speakers are local, I go meet them. I get their card or whatever, we touch iPhones and share contact. And then I write an email and I say, hey, if I think they're going to be the other thing, you got to be careful. You want people that can enter into the spirit of the ethics bowl. So you have to be a little practically wise about the people that you invite, but constantly talking about it within the venues that you find yourself in becomes the perfect opportunity to begin to build up a list of people that you can reach out to. And you could be intentional about the diversity of that list, and both in terms of disciplinary background, professional background, all variety of diversity issues, and you can be intentional about that. Anyway. All right, Rich, you got the last word, Richard. We're a couple minutes over.
Yeah. A very quick thought. Former students make great judges. Current
yeah.
students make great moderators.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so everyone, we have a 14-minute break now, or 13-minute, and we're going to come back at 3, and we're going to do an open, unconference, participant-generated series of conversations, right?
Mark, it just changed to 12.
Oh, okay, now it's 12. Okay,
Let's try like 11 and a half.
3 o'clock.
No worries.
3 o'clock. Let's just say 3 o'clock. Right.
Yeah.